Part 1 of The Affair at the Semiramis Hotel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. The Affair at the Semiramis Hotel by A.E.W. Mason. 1. Mr. Ricardo, when the excitements of the Villa Rose were done with, returned to Grosvenor Square and resumed the busy, unnecessary life of an amateur. But the studios had lost their savour, artists their attractiveness, and even the Russian opera seemed a trifle flat. Life was altogether a disappointment. Fate, like an actress at a restaurant, had taken the wooden pestle in her hand and stirred all the sparkle out of the champagne. Mr. Ricardo languished, until one unforgettable morning. He was sitting disconsolately at his breakfast table when the door was burst open, and a square, stout man with the blue-shaven face of a French comedian flung himself into the room. Ricardo sprang towards the newcomer with a cry of delight. "My dear Hanaud!" He seized his visitor by the arm, feeling it to make sure that here in flesh and blood stood the man who had introduced him to the acutest sensations of his life. He turned towards his butler, who was still bleating expostulations in the doorway at the unceremonious irruption of the French detective. "Another place, Burton, at once!" he cried, and as soon as he and Hanaud were alone, "What good wind blows you to London?" "Business, my friend. The disappearance of bullion somewhere on the line between Paris and London. But it is finished. Yes, I take a holiday." A light had suddenly flashed in Mr. Ricardo's eyes, and was now no less suddenly extinguished. Hanaud paid no attention whatever to his friend's disappointment. He pounced upon a piece of silver which adorned the tablecloth, and took it over to the window. "Everything is as it should be, my friend," he exclaimed with a grin. "Grosvenor Square, the Times open at the money column, and a false antique upon the table. Thus I have dreamed of you. All Mr. Ricardo is in that sentence." Ricardo laughed nervously. Recollection made him wary of Hanaud's sarcasms. He was shy even to protest the genuineness of his silver. But indeed he had not the time, for the door opened again, and once more the butler appeared. On this occasion, however, he was alone. "Mr. Calladine would like to speak to you, sir," he said. "Calladine!" cried Ricardo, in an extreme surprise. "That is a most extraordinary thing." He looked at the clock upon his mantelpiece. It was barely 8:30. "At this hour, too!" "Mr. Calladine is still wearing evening dress," the butler remarked. Ricardo started in his chair. He began to dream of possibilities. And here was Hanaud miraculously at his side. "Where is Mr. Calladine?" he asked. "I've shown him into the library." "Good," said Mr. Ricardo. "I will come to him." But he was in no hurry. He sat and let his thoughts play with this incident of Calladine's early visit. "It is very odd," he said. "I have not seen Calladine for months. No, nor has anyone. Yet a little while ago no one was more often seen." He fell apparently into a muse, but he was merely seeking to provoke Hanaud's curiosity. In this attempt, however, he failed. Hanaud continued placidly to eat his breakfast, so that Mr. Ricardo was compelled to volunteer the story which he was burning to tell. "Drink your coffee, Hanaud, and you shall hear about Calladine." Hanaud grunted with resignation, and Mr. Ricardo flowed on. "Calladine was one of England's young men. Everybody said so. He was going to do very wonderful things as soon as he had made up his mind exactly what sort of wonderful things he was going to do. Meanwhile, you met him in Scotland, at Newmarket, at Ascot, at Cowes, in the box of some great lady at the opera, not before 10:30 in the evening there, in any fine house where the candles that night happened to be lit. He went everywhere, and then a day came and he went nowhere. There was no scandal, no trouble, not a whisper against his good name. He simply vanished. For a little while a few people asked, 'What has become of Calladine?' But there never was any answer, and London has no time for unanswered questions. Other promising young men dined in his place. Calladine had joined the huge legion of the come-to-nothings. No one even seemed to pass him in the street. Now, unexpectedly, at 8:30 in the morning, and in evening dress, he calls upon me. Why? I asked myself. Mr. Ricardo sank once more into a reverie. Hanaud watched him with a broadening smile of pure enjoyment. "And in time, I suppose," he remarked casually, "you will perhaps ask him?" Mr. Ricardo sprang out of his pose to his feet. "Before I discuss serious things with an acquaintance," he said, with a scathing dignity, "I make it a rule to revive my impressions of his personality. The cigarettes are in the crystal box." "They would be," said Hanaud, unabashed, as Ricardo stalked from the room. But in 5 minutes Mr. Ricardo came running back, all his composure gone. "It is the greatest good fortune that you, my friend, should have chosen this morning to visit me," he cried, and Hanaud nodded with a little grimace of resignation. "There goes my holiday. You shall command me now, and always. I will make the acquaintance of your young friend." He rose up and followed Ricardo into his study, where a young man was nervously pacing the floor. "Mr. Calladine," said Ricardo, "this is Mr. Hanaud." The young man turned eagerly. He was tall, with a noticeable elegance and distinction, and the face which he showed to Hanaud was, in spite of its agitation, remarkably handsome. "I am very glad," he said. "You are not an official of this country. You can advise, without yourself taking action, if you'll be so good." Hanaud frowned. He bent his eyes uncompromisingly upon Calladine. "What does that mean?" he asked, with a note of sternness in his voice. "It means that I must tell someone," Calladine burst out in quivering tones, "that I don't know what to do. I am in a difficulty too big for me. That's the truth." Hanaud looked at the young man keenly. It seemed to Ricardo that he took in every excited gesture, every twitching feature, in one comprehensive glance. And then he said in a friendlier voice, "Sit down and tell me," and he himself drew up a chair to the table. "I was at the Semiramis last night," said Calladine, naming one of the great hotels upon the Embankment. "There was a fancy dress ball." All this happened, by the way, in those far-off days before the war, nearly, in fact, 3 years ago to-day, when London, flinging aside its reticence, its shy self-consciousness, had become a city of carnivals and masquerades, rivaling its neighbors on the Continent in the spirit of its gaiety, and exceeding them by its stupendous luxury. I went by the merest chance. My rooms are in the Adelphi Terrace. "There!" cried Mr. Ricardo in surprise, and Hanaud lifted a hand to check his interruptions. "Yes," continued Calladine, "the night was warm, the music floated through my open windows and stirred old memories. I happened to have a ticket, so I went." Calladine drew up a chair opposite to Hanaud, and, seating himself, told, with many nervous starts and in troubled tones, a story which, to Mr. Ricardo's thinking, was as fabulous as any out of the Arabian Nights. "I had a ticket," he began, "but no domino. I was consequently stopped by an attendant in the lounge at the top of the staircase leading down to the ballroom. 'You can hire a domino in the cloakroom, Mr. Calladine,' he said to me. I had already begun to regret the impulse which had brought me, and I welcomed the excuse with which the absence of a costume provided me. I was, indeed, turning back to the door, when a girl who had at that moment run down from the stairs of the hotel into the lounge, cried gaily, 'That's not necessary!' and at the same moment she flung to me a long scarlet cloak which she had been wearing over her own dress. She was young, fair, rather tall, slim, and very pretty. Her hair was drawn back from her face with a ribbon and rippled down her shoulders in heavy curls, and she was dressed in a satin coat and knee breeches of pale green and gold, with a white waistcoat and silk stockings and scarlet heels to her satin shoes. She was as straight-limbed as a boy, and exquisite like a figure in Dresden china. I caught the cloak and turned to thank her, but she did not wait. With a laugh she ran down the stairs, a supple and shining figure, and was lost in the throng at the doorway of the ballroom. I was stirred by the prospect of an adventure. I ran down after her. She was standing just inside the room, alone, and she was gazing at the scene with parted lips and dancing eyes. She laughed again as she saw the cloak about my shoulders, a delicious gurgle of amusement, and I said to her, 'May I dance with you?' "Oh, do!" she cried, with a little jump, and clasping her hands. She was of a high and joyous spirit, and not difficult in the matter of an introduction. "This gentleman will do very well to present us," she said, leading me in front of a bust of the god Pan, which stood in a niche of the wall. "I am, as you see, straight out of an opera. My name is Célimène, or anything with an 18th century sound to it. You are, well, what you will. For this evening we are friends." "And for to-morrow?" I asked. "I will tell you about that later on," she replied, and she began to dance with a light step and a passion in her dancing which earned me many an envious glance from the other men. I was in luck, for Célimène knew no one, and though, of course, I saw the faces of a great many people whom I remembered, I kept them all at a distance. We had been dancing for about half an hour when the first queerish thing happened. She stopped suddenly in the midst of a sentence with a little gasp. I spoke to her, but she did not hear. She was gazing past me, her eyes wide open, and such a rapt look upon her face as I had never seen. She was lost in a miraculous vision. I followed the direction of her eyes, and, to my astonishment, I saw nothing more than a stout, short, middle-aged woman, egregiously overdressed as Marie Antoinette. "So you do know someone here," I said, and I had to repeat the word sharply before my friend withdrew her eyes. But even then she was not aware of me. It was as if a voice had spoken to her whilst she was asleep and had disturbed but not wakened her. Then she came to. There's really no other word I can think of which describes her at that moment. She came to with a deep sigh. "No," she answered, "she is a Mrs. Blumenstein from Chicago, a widow with ambitions and a great deal of money, but I don't know her." "Yet you know all about her," I remarked. "She crossed in the same boat with me," Célimène replied. "Did I tell you that I landed at Liverpool this morning? She is staying at the Semiramis, too. Oh, let's dance." She twitched my sleeve impatiently and danced with a kind of violence and wildness as if she wished to banish some sinister thought. And she did undoubtedly banish it. We supped together and grew confidential, as under such conditions people will. She told me her real name. It was Joan Carew. "I have come over to get an engagement, if I can, at Covent Garden. I'm supposed to sing all right, but I don't know any one. I have been brought up in Italy." "You have some letters of introduction, I suppose?" I asked. "Oh, yes. One from my teacher in Milan, one from an American manager." In my turn I told her my name and where I lived, and I gave her my card. I thought, you see, that since I had used to know a good many operatic people, I might be able to help her. "Thank you," she said, and at that moment Mrs. Blumenstein, followed by a party, chiefly those lapdog young men who always seem to gather about that kind of person, came into the supper-room and took a table close to us. There was at once an end of all confidences, indeed of all conversation. Joan Carew lost all the lightness of her spirit. She talked at random, and her eyes were drawn again and again to the grotesque slander on Marie Antoinette. Finally I became annoyed. "Shall we go?" I suggested impatiently, and to my surprise she whispered passionately, "Oh, yes, please, let us go." Her voice was actually shaking, her small hands clenched. We went back to the ballroom, but Joan Carew did not recover her gaiety, and halfway through a dance, when we were near to the door, she stopped abruptly, extraordinarily abruptly. "I shall go," she said abruptly. "I'm tired. I've grown dull." I protested, but she made a little grimace. "You'll hate me in half an hour. Let's be wise and stop now while we are friends," she said, and whilst I removed the domino from my shoulders she stooped very quickly. It seemed to me that she picked up something which had lain hidden beneath the sole of her slipper. She certainly moved her foot, and I certainly saw something small and bright flash in the palm of her glove as she raised herself again. But I imagined merely that it was some object which she had dropped. "Yes, we'll go," she said, and we went up the stairs into the lobby. Certainly all the sparkle had gone out of our adventure. I recognized her wisdom. "But I shall see you again?" I asked. "Yes, I have your address. I'll write and fix a time when you will be sure to find me in. Good night, and 1,000 thanks. I should have been bored to tears if you hadn't come without a domino." She was speaking lightly as she held out her hand, but her grip tightened a little and clung. Her eyes darkened and grew troubled, her mouth trembled. The shadow of a great trouble had suddenly closed upon her. She shivered. "I am half inclined to ask you to stay, however dull I am, and dance with me till daylight, the safe daylight," she said. It was an extraordinary phrase for her to use, and it moved me. "Let us go back, then," I urged. She gave me an impression suddenly of someone quite forlorn. But Joan Carew recovered her courage. "No, no," she answered quickly. She snatched her hand away and ran lightly up the staircase, turning at the corner to wave her hand and smile. It was then 1:30 in the morning. So far Caledine had spoken without an interruption. Mr. Ricardo, it is true, was bursting to break in with the most important questions, but a salutary fear of Hanaud restrained him. Now, however, he had an opportunity, for Celadine paused. 1:30, he said sagely. "Ah! And when did you go home?" Hanaud asked of Caledine. "True," said Mr. Ricardo. "It is of the greatest consequence." Caledine was not so sure. His partner had left behind her the strangest medley of sensations in his breast. He was puzzled, haunted, and charmed. He had to think about her. He was a trifle uplifted. Sleep was impossible. He wandered for a while about the ballroom. Then he walked to his chambers along the echoing streets and sat at his window. And some time afterwards the hoot of a motor horn broke the silence, and a car stopped and whirred in the street below. A moment later his bell rang. He ran down the stairs in a queer excitement, unlocked the street door, and opened it to Joan Carew, still in her masquerade dress, with her scarlet cloak about her shoulders, slipped through the opening. "Shut the door," she whispered, drawing herself apart in a corner. "Your cab?" asked Caledine. "It's gone." Caledine latched the door. Above, in the well of the stairs, the light spread out from the open door of his flat. Down here all was dark. He could just see the glimmer of her white face, the glitter of her dress, but she drew her breath like one who has run far. They mounted the stairs cautiously. He did not say a word until they were both safely in his parlor, and even then it was in a low voice. "What has happened?" "You remember the woman I stared at? You didn't know why I stared, but any girl would have understood. She was wearing the loveliest pearls I ever saw in my life." Joan was standing by the edge of the table. She was tracing with her finger a pattern on the cloth as she spoke. Caledine started with a horrible presentiment. "Yes," she said, "I worship pearls. I always have done. For one thing, they improve on me. I haven't got any, of course. I have no money. But friends of mine who do own pearls have sometimes given theirs to me to wear when they were going sick, and they have always got back their luster. I think that has had a little to do with my love of them. Oh, I've always longed for them, just a little string. Sometimes I have felt that I would have given my soul for them." She was speaking in a dull, monotonous voice, but Caledine recalled the ecstasy which had shone in her face when her eyes first had fallen on the pearls, the longing which had swept her quite into another world, the passion with which she had danced to throw the obsession off. "And I never noticed them at all," he said. "Yet they were wonderful. The color, the luster. All the evening they tempted me. I was furious that a fat, coarse creature like that should have such exquisite things. Oh, I was mad." She covered her face suddenly with her hands and swayed. Caledine sprang towards her, but she held out her hand. "No, I'm all right." And, though he asked her to sit down, she would not. "You remember when I stopped dancing suddenly?" "Yes, you had something hidden under your foot." The girl nodded. "Her key," and under his breath Caledine uttered a startled cry. For the first time since she had entered the room Joan Carew raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were full of terror, and with the terror was mixed an incredulity, as though she could not possibly believe that that had happened which she knew had happened. "A little Yale key," the girl continued. "I saw Mrs. Blumenstein looking on the floor for something, and then I saw it shining on the very spot. Mrs. Blumenstein's suite was on the same floor as mine, and her maid slept above. All the maids do. I knew that. Oh, it seemed to me as if I had sold my soul and was being paid." Now Caledine understood what she had meant by her strange phrase, "the safe daylight." "I went up to my little suite," Joan Carew continued. "I sat there with the key burning through my glove until I had given her time enough to fall asleep. And though she hesitated before she spoke the words, she did speak them, not looking at Caledine, and with a shudder of remorse making her confession complete. Then I crept out. The corridor was dimly lit. Far away below, the music was throbbing. Up here it was as silent as the grave. I opened the door, her door. I found myself in a lobby. The suite, though bigger, was arranged like mine. I slipped in and closed the door behind me. I listened in the darkness. I couldn't hear a sound. I crept forward to the door in front of me. I stood with my fingers on the handle and my heart beating fast enough to choke me. I had still time to turn back. But I could not. There were those pearls in front of my eyes, lustrous and wonderful. I opened the door gently an inch or so, and then it all happened in a second. End of Part 1.